Among the varied compounds that form our world, 3 related groups have an unusual significance in chemistry. Acids, bases, and salts have a vast commercial importance in a highly productive, technologically based society. Acids, bases, and salts all form ions in solution. In the presence of an electric field, the negative ions experience a force toward the positive pole, and the positive ions in the other direction. This constitutes the flow of an electric current. Because of this characteristic, acids, bases, and salts are all called electrolytes, substances whose solutions produce ions and conduct electricity. Strong electrolytes are useful whenever we need to pass a current through a liquid. For example, the flow of electricity in many car batteries depends on the electrical conductivity of acid solutions. And nerve cells and the microscopic fibers they form depend on salt solutions to conduct electrical messages that keep organisms in touch with their environments. At room temperature, salts are almost always crystalline solids. In the laboratory, it's usually easiest to handle acids and bases when they're dissolved in water. Chemists label such solutions AQ, or aqueous. But a solution of an acid looks pretty much like a solution of a base. How can you tell them apart? One way is by their effect on certain dyes, called acid-base indicators. Litmus, a dye made from lichen plants, is commonly used for this purpose. It can be impregnated on papers or used in water solution. If we add a few drops of dissolved litmus to an unknown solution and it turns red, we can define the substance as an acid. And if a substance turns litmus blue, we can define it as a base. And so their effect on indicators is one way of differentiating between acids and bases. Underlying this effect on indicators is an ionic difference between acids and bases when they're in solution. Most acids contain hydrogen. We can see this in their formulas. When a molecule of such an acid dissolves, it loses an H+ ion to a water molecule. This water molecule becomes a hydronium ion with a positive charge. In contrast, most bases contain OH, or hydroxide groups, in their formulas. When they dissolve, the hydroxide ions become hydrogen ion acceptors. When we test a solution with litmus, we're really testing the relative concentration of these ions. But we can't always differentiate between acids and bases just by reading their formulas. For example, oxygen compounds, oxides, have neither hydrogen nor hydroxide groups in their formulas. Yet, take CaO, calcium oxide, which is simple lime. Calcium oxide, mixed into a litmus solution, gives it a bluish cast. So, by definition, it's a base, even without a hydroxide group. In general, oxides of metals are bases, while oxides of non-metals are generally acids. Carbon dioxide in solution turns litmus red. So, oxides may produce either acidic or basic solutions, and usually substances with hydrogen atoms are acids, and substances with hydroxide groups are bases, usually, but not always. For example, when we compare the molecular structure of these two compounds, we can see that molecules of both compounds contain hydroxide groups. It might seem that both compounds are bases, but let's find out. The first substance is barium hydroxide. A solution of barium hydroxide turns litmus blue, so it's a base, contributing hydroxide ions to the solution as the bonds break between the barium and hydroxide groups. A solution of the second substance turns litmus red. A different bond is broken, and instead of giving off hydroxide ions, the molecule forms hydronium ions. The substance is an acid, better known by the familiar formula H2SO4 sulfuric acid. This arrangement of symbols emphasizes its acidic nature. But sometimes the presence of hydrogen in a formula can be misleading. For example, bubbling ammonia gas through water produces an ammonia solution that's a base. But ammonia's formula is NH3. Since it clearly contains hydrogen atoms, it looks like ammonia should donate H+ ions to water molecules and form hydronium ions the way an acid does. Instead, water molecules lose H+ ions to ammonia molecules, so that they, not the ammonia, are responsible for the excess of hydroxide ions in the solution. Because of special cases like these, acids and bases are more often described not in terms of whether they produce hydroxide or hydronium ions in water solutions, but how they react with water as they dissolve. The key to this description is the hydrogen atom. The single proton in its nucleus has a positive charge, balanced by a single electron in the first energy level. But during reactions that move the H+ ion from one molecule to another, the ion leaves its electron behind with the molecule it was part of. Now, it's just an H+ nucleus. The vast majority of these are simple protons. So we can say that when molecules of the acid HCl dissolve in water, they donate protons to water molecules, which become hydronium ions. The same occurs with all acids. An acid is a proton donor. But when the base ammonia dissolves in water, it accepts protons from the water. So we can say a base is a proton acceptor. The concept of bases as proton acceptors and acids as proton donors is the basis of the Bronsted-Lowry theory of acids and bases. According to this theory, only substances that contain hydrogen can be acids. Another theory, the Lewis theory of acids and bases, is more general, but not as convenient to use. It states that an acid is an electron pair acceptor, and that a base is an electron pair donor. So when ammonia, NH3, reacts with water and picks up a hydrogen nucleus containing a proton, it's also donating a pair of its electrons to the H+. So NH3 acts as both a Bronsted base and a Lewis base. All Lewis bases are Bronsted bases, but the Lewis theory considers many substances as acids that the Bronsted theory does not. Each theory has certain advantages in helping us organize our understanding of acids and bases. Within the broad classification of acid and base, chemists further define these two types of substances in terms of strength. For example, the citric acid in orange juice is a weak acid. But the hydrochloric acid that the stomach uses to digest food is a strong acid. In this case, strong and weak refer to the degree to which a substance ionizes when it dissolves, usually in water. When ammonia dissolves, only a few of its molecules react with water to form ions. So ammonia is a weak base. The degree of ionization determines the strength of acids and bases. Ionization also plays a part in the behavior of water. With a sensitive meter, we can detect a trace of current flowing through pure water. This is evidence of the fact that water molecules do indeed ionize, but to a very slight degree. When a water molecule ionizes, it forms one hydronium and one hydroxide ion. Of course, these are the same two kinds of ions that give acids and bases their character. But because there are always the same number of each, water is neither acid nor base, but neutral. Now, as water molecules are breaking apart, they're also rejoining. But when an acid dissolves in water and produces additional hydronium ions, assuming constant temperature, the number of hydroxide ions in the solution from the ionized water molecules goes down, because in a given sample, the product of hydronium and hydroxide ions is always constant. As a result, the solution grows more acidic. There's a mathematical way of describing the acidity of a solution by indicating how many hydronium ions are present in 1 liter. This is about how many hydronium ions there are in 1 liter of pure water. Exponents make the number easier to deal with. To give this number some relative meaning chemically, we can compare it with the mole, a standard number of particles, molecules, atoms, or ions in a liter of solution. In a mole, there are 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd particles. Simple division shows that pure water contains about this fraction of a mole, 1 over 10 to the 7th. Remember, pure water is neutral. A very acidic solution might contain 6 times 10 to the 22nd or more hydronium ions per liter, which would be 1/10 of a mole, or 1 over 10 to the first power. On the other hand, a very basic solution might contain only 6 times 10 to the 9th, or less hydronium ions per liter, which would be this fraction of a mole, 1 over 10 to the 14th. So we could express the acidity of most solutions within this range, and we do, but in a shortened way that was invented by a chemist in a bottling plant, where he had to keep track of the acidity of the beverages being bottled. Instead of recording the actual number of hydronium ions in his samples in terms of fractions of a mole, he simply noted the exponent of the 10 in the denominator of the fraction. So 7 represented the acidity of pure water. And he added a P to indicate it represented the power of 10 in the denominator, and an H to show we're dealing with the extra H plus ion that converts a water molecule to a hydronium ion. And so the concept of pH was born. Acidic solutions have a pH of less than 7, down to 1 or less. Pure water has a pH of 7, and very basic solutions have a pH of more than 7, up to 14 or more. The acidity of substances, of course, has importance far beyond beverage bottling plants. In living things, tiny changes in pH can be disastrous. For example, in fermentation, bacteria give off lactic acid among their waste products. The faster the colony grows, the more acid it gives off. And soon the pH of its growing medium begins to decrease, which means the acidity is increasing. At a certain point, the bacteria begin to die. Soon the entire colony is poisoned by its own acidic wastes. Blood is also affected by changes in pH, which can cause dangerous conditions called acidosis or alkalosis. But such changes can be controlled by buffers. A buffer is a combination of an acid or a base and one of its salts. If a buffer is in a solution that becomes too acidic, ions from the salt pull H plus ions off hydronium ions, producing water. So the solution grows less acidic. And if a buffer is in a solution that becomes too basic, ions from the acid bind up hydroxide ions, pulling them out of solution, so the solution grows less basic. Human blood contains 2 sets of buffers to better guard against changes in pH. So far, we focused on acids and bases, but in a laboratory, compounds are usually salts. Salts are often the safest way to store elements like sodium that are dangerous in pure form. A salt is the result of a reaction between an acid and a base, an ionic compound that contains a positive ion other than just a hydrogen ion, H+. Here we're mixing equal amounts of the strong acid, hydrochloric acid, and sodium hydroxide, a strong base, in equal concentrations. Actually, this reaction yields 3 results. One is a change in energy. In our experiment, the temperature of the solution goes up. Such an energy change is a sign that a chemical reaction is taking place. Another result of this reaction is called neutralization. When equal concentrations of hydronium and hydroxide ions are brought together in water, the extra ions tend to neutralize each other by combining into water. So we can mix a strong acid and a strong base to produce a solution that has a pH of 7, the pH of pure water. The third result of an acid-base reaction is, of course, a salt. Usually acids, bases, and salts form and interact on their own as part of the workings of the forces we call nature. But sometimes the pollution caused by human activities has its influence. Compounds in the smoke of factory chimneys and in the exhaust fumes of cars and trucks are converted by sunlight and oxygen and catalysts in the air into acids. The acids return to Earth, sometimes dissolved in raindrops. Normally, raindrops are slightly acid from dissolved carbon dioxide gas that has reacted with the water and formed carbonic acid, a weak acid. But compounds of sulfur and nitrogen from pollutants can produce extremely acid rain with a pH of 4 or lower. Remember, pure water's pH is 7. Acid rain may damage plants, slow their growth. Sometimes, acid rain that passes through the ground on its way to a lake is buffered by materials in the soil. And even though the rain is acid, the lake water itself may ultimately have a pH around a neutral 7. Acid rain is just one of the vast number of ways that acids, bases, and salts enter our lives, ranging from the chemical underpinnings of our technologically based society to the chemistry of life itself, as well as to the environments on which the continuation and quality of all life on our planet depend.